Um, Here's what I want to talk to you about,
Yep.
as I think we have a quorum in our makeshift classroom on the stack. It's a provocative title, your new book, the latest, In Defense of Partisanship. Defend yourself, sir. Not just partisanship, but defend yourself for having that view. Surely you don't mean that all of our complaining and the analysis that people have done about tribalism and about polarization and all of that is incorrect.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
no, I don't. I
what the
mean,
heck do you mean?
so the book gets a short, kind of quick, accessible history and basically makes the argument that since the founding, when the founders very much didn't want partisanship, didn't want division, we have had it. And the way we've organized our politics is through these two major institutions. And really, until recently, they've served a function. I mean, they have organized different coalitions into some kind of political process. They've often generated big ideas. FDR and the New Deal comes out of Democratic politics. Reagan and conservatism comes out of Republican politics. And they help kind of create connections across our fragmented, disjointed system. So I just try to provide a history of what it's done well, partisanship, why parties have been important. And I do argue that, and I focus on the Republican Party, that it's moved in a direction in the last couple decades where it's created a new kind of really destructive partisanship, one without rules. And that shouldn't be kind of an argument against the political parties altogether. And I think some would argue finally that in a moment like this, some partisanship might be the only kind of way forward out of this moment of Trump 2.0.
Well, but so what's interesting to me is, as you write and confirm, what other people have written and confirmed, that both parties, the Democratic Party included very specifically, poll very low. There's a lot of disappointment in the parties. Is that one of the things that allowed Trump to come in not as a third party, but kind of a little bit like an ill-fitting Republican GOP suit to make what is essentially a third party, but from within the Republican Party? Does that make any sense?
Well, I hear what you're saying. I'd say there's two parts of that. One is just a big moment we've been in since the 70s, since Watergate, of high levels of distrust in institutions, which keeps getting worse for parties, for the presidency, for everything, the media, and more. I do think Trump has thrived on that. He is not someone who focuses on what you like. He focuses on what people don't like. And so that kind of bigger culture, which includes the parties, is important. But the Republican Party has changed. I mean, it wasn't simply he found space for a third party within the Republican Party. The Republican Party of 2015 and 16 had radicalized pretty significantly via the Tea Party in the 2010s, via the Newt Gingrich generation in the 80s. So by the time he came on, I think you had a party that practiced a very aggressive, smash mouth form of partisanship where his style, his rhetoric, his willingness to do anything actually fit pretty well. And now it's only intensified as he legitimated that at the presidential level. So for me, that's really kind of how the GOP and Trumpism entered into a marriage.
So why then, if your criticism holds of the Republicans and the GOP, um, are not the fortunes of Democrats rising? Why are the fortunes of Democrats falling?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, part of it, I think they have been stuck trying to envision what the party is about. Strong parties do need a vision, a strong message, an agenda that's compelling. FDR on his own and the Democrats on their own, neither were enough to make the New Deal coalition. It was the New Deal that helped to forge the coalition. And I'm not sure Democrats know what that is. I think they do have a generational kind of problem, which is part of what people are reacting to. And it's not just age, it's generational in that it's a Democratic Party that's speaking ideas and arguments from decades ago. And many people are not excited about that. And part of it, the final part, and it's a hard part, they're in a political environment where their opponents are playing without rules. And I tell my class often, and I tell groups when I'm speaking, it's like you have a great chess game, and you have a match, and one side is trying to win. They're trying to calculate the best moves, and they're following the rules. And the other team takes the board and throws it on the floor and says, "We win."
Yeah.
And that's less about the support for Democrats, but it is an environment where they look perpetually incompetent because they're in this atmosphere. And I think that's a challenge to convince voters you're still an effective party.
Yeah. I like your chess metaphor, except the version I've heard is one side is trying to calculate the moves within the rules, and the other guy is eating the pieces.
That's a good one, too.
Maybe a little more. Um, what is the lesson of Bernie Sanders? Not just Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders along with AOC going around the country and getting massive crowds. Is there a lesson in that for Democrats?
For sure. I mean, whatever one thinks of their overall agenda, certainly one thing that Sanders very clearly and consistently talks about is the working and middle class economy. That's his
Yeah.
bread and butter issue. And it's very clear that Democrats have kind of slipped on that. Their partisanship has moved too far away from that very foundational issue since the 1930s. And Sanders appeals not just because he's charismatic, which at some level he is, but he keeps hammering away at that very straightforward, important issue for Americans. Part of it is going out and doing old fashioned campaign work. You know,
But
politics
that doesn't
still, even today, is not all this or it's not all Washington.
it's not all Substack.
And he's not
It's not-
and he's not scared to do it. And I think there's something to play. He's also just very direct. And I think Democrat, centrist, left, whatever your position, there is an element of the way he speaks that is extremely effective. You believe what he's saying, even if you don't agree with it. And I think for a party that is very powerful, I think Republicans do benefit from some of that.
AOC also, or do you draw a distinction in that respect between Sanders and AOC?
Well, she's clearly effective. I don't think she's yet kind of proven herself at the level he did in the campaigns, but she does focus on those issues. Her own biography is that
Yeah.
story, so it's very interesting. She does speak with great clarity. She's a little different in that, and he doesn't do this. She does understand this world, meaning not just the social media, modern media world. In a way, I think a lot of Democrats also, as a party, have stumbled. And so she brings that part to it. Is this a ticket? I don't know. I'm not convinced of that. But there are lessons that I think the Democratic Party, as they rebuild themselves, can clearly take just from watching this.
Um, you said generically social media. You said this. I'm advised by the Substack overlords that we're supposed to say Substack
Okay.
seven times per recording.
Okay.
I think we're up to.
Substack. Very
I
good.
think we're up to four Substack, or as I like to say, the stack. You also say there's another source from which Democrats should take some lessons, which again, on the face of it, seems to cause skepticism, and that is Ronald Reagan.
Mhm.
What I mean, other than the fact that, if I recall correctly, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, began as a Democrat before drifting into conservatism. Um, what lessons does Reagan have for Democrats, possibly?
Well, the starting point is if Democrats are going to not only defeat whoever comes after Trump, but actually make a coalition that's viable, they need to look to people who have done that. And Reagan did that. So I looked back at that 1980 campaign, and Reagan did a number of things which are relevant for Democrats today. He successfully made the incumbent president, at that time Jimmy Carter, a ongoing focus of his campaign. And he really figured out, how do you make a mandate of the party that's in power, and telling voters the only way out of this kind of politics is through his election. He was very good at bridging very different coalitions without bringing them together. So Republicans were incredibly fragmented in 1980, and he found themes that didn't divide, they united. In that case, it was anti-communism and lower taxation. And that's not what Democrats have to do now, but they do need to kind of refine, hammer away, and have that same kind of focus going into 1980. So there were elements of his campaign which arguably helped to remake American politics that I think can be very useful for Democrats when they are facing the challenges they do.
It's funny. As you're speaking, I was remembering one of the most famous phrases of Reagan's campaigns, not that he used, but that commentators used to describe his coalition. And you don't hear a word like this anymore, a term like this anymore. Reagan Democrats.
Mhm.
Although Trump made inroads, I mean, is there such a thing as is there a collection of Trump Democrats, or were there Bush Democrats?
Well, Trump certainly won over formerly Democratic voters or non-active voters who would theoretically lean Democratic. We saw it with Black American men, Latinos. There were key parts that were not naturally Republican. Even rural working Americans are not inherently a Republican coalition. So Trump himself was able to do that with Democrats.
Yeah,
But we live in an age, I mean, this gets to polarization. We are not in an age where you have landslide elections. There are no more 1984 elections. There are no more so that
right.
means
1984 for the
yeah,
youngins. 49 states
right.
for one guy. That's never happening again, is it?
Not in the near future. That their polarization prevents that. So the benefit is Democrats don't need to do that. I mean, you're talking about finding the kind of Democratic Trump voters, either winning back people who flipped or winning the suburban female voters who are unhappy with some of what's going on. Whatever, you can pick the coalition, but it's small little numbers that can change the election. And I do think that's
Yeah.
possible for Democrats.
So there's been a lot of talk lately. I haven't really focused on it, but I've heard it in the background. Maybe someone has written something about this you would know as the historian
Yep.
in this duo. Um, a straight line from William F. Buckley to Donald Trump. Has someone been opining on that? And their styles are so different, erudite versus whatever the opposite of erudite is. Do you see that, or do you have a view on that?
Well, Sam Tannenhouse has a new biography of William
That's what
Buckley.
it is.
I haven't read it yet. It just came out. I have a copy. And I think he does kind of try to see where that does exist and doesn't exist. Certainly, look, I mean, one argument historians have been looking at, there are elements of what we would consider far right republicanism or far right conservatism that were around in the 50s and 60s and often in greater proximity to people like William Buckley, mainstream conservatives or mainstream candidates than we remember. It doesn't mean they were the top candidate, but they were
Yeah.
never far reactionary on social issues, for example, engaging in conspiratorial thinking. You can find this all the time. There was a great book by Daniel Bell, the sociologist, and he edited a book in the 50s and reprinted in the 60s called The Radical Right. And it was about all these groups. If you read it now, you'd think you were talking about contemporary far right politics who were
Hmm.
in a country we thought was liberal and who were much closer to mainstream, either Republican or Southern Democratic politics than we accepted. And so, yes, I think there's been scholars then and today who see that parts of what Trump is doing have deep roots going back to that Buckley generation.
Is there some magic, just to talk more about the party system? Is there some magic in two? Could there
Uh,
be magic in three? People are always trying. Andrew Yang, who ran for president, did better than a lot of people expected. Sort of interesting. He keeps talking about a third way. There's always talk about the third way. When people are disappointed in these guys and disappointed in these guys, it seems natural and logical to say, well, what about this new thing? And that has never really come to pass in any significant way. Should it? And why not?
yeah, I mean, the last new party that did well was the Republican Party,
Right,
and
right.
it doesn't work. I mean, you could make an ideal case that a fresh party with new ideas, a new coalition would be good for American politics. There's no need. These are the two parties we have. Whether it's a third party or actually a third party that becomes one of the two parties, I could see the argument. I don't think it's going to happen because the
Yeah.
reality is, even if they're disliked, these two parties are very strong. They're strong organizationally, financially, and even many voters, we know this, who say they don't like the parties, will still vote for one of the two parties pretty consistently. So if you're that entrenched, they will continue to absorb third party ideas. I think more important is that those third party ideas find their way, the good ones, into the mainstream party. And how can Democrats, if that's the perspective, not become so rigid that they don't transform themselves? So there's no magic in two parties, but I'm not one who thinks that kind of Yang's model has high chance at the
Yeah.
local level. At the local level, we see a
So I was
little
going to
more.
ask you about the local.
Yeah,
It's a great segue. So I understand that on big picture issues, foreign policy, trade, tax policy, things that affect the entire nation, rule of law, all of that, that's often, party-based stuff. There has been in recent years a movement towards ranked choice voting and nonpartisan municipal elections, particularly in certain cities.
yeah,
My city of New York has now gone down that road.
yeah.
Is that better? Is that better? And does that say anything about what national politics could aspire to?
I don't think it still says what national politics can aspire to. I also still think we are divided on a lot of those issues you just talked about. The divisions are real. So I'd rather have choices that can have clarity rather than kind of a gray that confuses people even
Hmm.
more. But at the municipal level, there's something. The ranked choice voting. One of the problems is it's very confusing, and in New York's
Right.
mayoral race, that happens. So there. I
But but
do
but
think
but
it's
but the point
yeah,
is, right?
yeah.
Do you agree with the point and the premise for folks who are not in such jurisdictions
Yeah.
that it sort of lops off the people who are very extreme on the one end and very extreme on the other end, and it creates a more moderate result? Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Some people, I tend to think that's a good thing.
Right.
What do you think people would think about that as a national model? Like for the reasons you say, not great.
I'm not sure. I'm not really. I hear the argument. I hear the yearning for that moderate center. I'm just not sure it reflects where the country is on a lot of this. I think it's right now. It's a struggle between two different visions of the country, and I think the real issue is which party can absorb those moderate voices and make them part of their coalition, as opposed to kind of fragmenting. That's important. I mean, that is a voice, and
Yeah,
they often are the swings who basically will determine the election. That's how I see it. The municipal level is very different. And I mean, two things. One are the issues are much different and they're more kind of practical and immediate. So you don't always need the ideological divisions. You need who's going to finance the the snow removal. And secondly, you don't feel like you're wasting a vote. I mean, a lot of people feel right now if you vote for that other model, you might give the other party that you don't like the
yeah.
victory. But at the local level, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure at the national level.
I have one last question for you,
Yeah.
but before I do that, I want to note for the record that you uttered a sentence that 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 contained two words that are not often in the same sentence. That was yearning and moderate.
Uh,
I don't know that yearning is a word often associated with moderate. Although maybe I sometimes yearn for that, but I think I'm alone. Um, Honest answer to this, and obviously you're a historian, so you don't predict the future necessarily. Is there an argument that Donald Trump, at this moment, given everything that's happened in recent weeks, has peaked politically?
I don't. I would be leery about saying he's peaked politically. We have
Hmm.
seen him perpetually remake his strength, and we know his standing in the Republican Party still remains very strong, regardless of the problem. I think more interesting are the effectiveness of people who are resisting. And it includes institutional actors. I think, for example, what many lower level federal judges have done has had an effect. Even if the administration's pushing against what they are ordering, it has slowed this down. It has kind of created a rhetoric for people to understand why the administration's policies don't follow due process, constitutional law. The universities that have now stepped up, I think
Yeah,
it's had an effect. So I don't know if he's peaked, but he certainly is not just kind of, you know, plowing through American politics and policy the way he was. And you can see the outlines of how this can move in a different direction. We're still in the middle of it. Who knows? But I think it is fair to say um, he's not where he was a few months ago.
right,
And you can see pathway to a different politics.
right. So he's a bull in a china shop, but the china shop is fighting back.
And people are seeing that their plates are broken. I mean, I think
Right.
that's part of it too. And not just in blue states, they're seeing things are breaking, and people don't like that. You can be the reddest conservative, and at some level, if things you count on, things you depend on are no longer there, and you can connect the dots easily because he makes it easy to connect the dots, you make yourself politically vulnerable. Like if you have Senator Hawley defending Medicaid, as a main issue, you know something is going on within Republican politics that's
Yeah,
shifting.
absolutely. I could talk to you all day, sir. But you need to get back to work, as do I think some proportion of our viewers and listeners. Professor Julian Salazar of the great Princeton University, thanks so much for spending time. We'll talk
Thanks for
again soon.
having Thanks for having me on
Okay.
your Substack. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Substack. I think that's seven.
All right, we'll talk again
Thanks
soon.
everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye.